Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots, where we reclaim virtue to bring it to our home and yours. And I'm Thomas McCuddy.
I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And today we're going to tackle the big topic of how do we teach our children to deal with moral dilemmas. And so some think that dilemmas are, there's no such thing as a moral dilemma because there's just a right and a wrong in every situation. And I, for a fact, know this is not the case. Just this week, I think I came to you because I was struggling with a moral dilemma myself, and I needed desperately to lean on someone who could help me balance it out. And you would agree it was a moral dilemma, correct?
Absolutely.
It was a tough one. And so it's easy to say that there's just right and there's wrong and there's no gray area. And I don't know if we call it gray, but I do think that it's not always straightforward as to what the right answer is. Sometimes it is. So I want to start us out, Mark 3:1-6. It says, "Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, 'Come here.' And he said to them, 'Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill?' But they were silent, and he looked around at them with anger, grieved at the hardness of heart, said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him." And so we have other examples throughout Scripture of moral dilemmas. We have the spies who, if they would have told the truth that the spies were there, they would have been killed, but yet they lied, and that was the right thing. That was the moral thing to do. We have eating, picking wheat on Sabbath to eat. We have a few of these different ideas of dilemmas, and I think it's important that not only we ourselves learn how to navigate them, but we have to teach it to our children. So I'm going to throw out the first question because I think it's going to be the most controversial aspect of the whole thing. All sins are created equal, right?
Okay. We have several things we have to deal with, so we'll deal with that one since that's been thrown out.
I feel like it's a softball. Like I feel like Thomas, take this one,
and then we'll define what moral dilemma is. But I think that in some ways convolutes the issue because when people say all sins are the same, the problem is we've got two different aspects at work. There's the sin that separates us from God. So there's a sense all sin separates us from God, and it does have that same effect. But not all sins.
The penalty for all sin is
ultimately
death.
The ultimate penalty. But there's even sins are not treated the same by God, even among people. That he basically says, you have done a very wicked thing versus someone who's done something to a lesser degree.
Right.
So there is that sense of almost, we recognize that you have to have a certain level of seared conscience to commit certain acts regularly. And so that's why it's a popular thing. And I know that there'll be people, because it's happened. I've had students of mine who've gone into the church, and that whole idea, all sin is the same. And when you challenge that, people get very upset.
They do.
And because we're saying that there's two different references going on. And that's why, in one sense, it is in relation to our separation from God and the ultimate result being death. But there's more of a temporal aspect that right here, right now, like even my children, I do not punish my children the same for all of their various sins. That would be unjust of me to bring these different punishments, even though all those sins have broken the relationship with me in some way.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a different way of handling it. Now,
so I think this is important to understand as we move forward. There is graded. I mean, like there are different levels, and I think that's because sometimes when we face these actual dilemmas, it may feel as if there's no right, there's no way to do what is good without sinning, and I don't think that's the case. So we're gonna get there, I believe, but then. Please explain what a moral dilemma is.
Okay. So that's the crux of this issue, is that when you have an obligation, it's clear, like if you have a rule and you're supposed to follow the rule. But what happens with a moral dilemma is you have two obligations that are conflicting with each other. And that's why you face this dilemma, because what do? If I do this one thing, I'll disregard this one obligation. If I do this other, I disregard the other. That creates the conflict. That creates the dilemma. It's like, well, if I again, if we I think the classic one is always, do you lie to save a life? Because we're supposed to tell the truth, but we're also supposed to save people's lives. So we face, in this sense, and we might even say a perceived dilemma, because for some people, they're like, no, if I have this situation, I know exactly what to do. They would say there's no dilemma. The idea is that the dilemma is that you genuinely have two principles that are conflicting.
Right.
Okay. So the question is always, how do we resolve that? What do we do? And I think what happens in the home is we try to oversimplify. Mm. And when we do that, we run the risk of not actually doing the right thing. Or I think what also happens is we do the right thing for the wrong reason. Because one idea that I'll always challenge when I hear people talk about, you've got to choose the lesser evil, it makes no sense whatsoever for us to have an obligation to do evil. We never choose evil.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So if there's one thing that if anyone can take away from this talk, don't use that kind of language. Right. We're not teaching children to choose evil. We want to shift that, and we want to choose the greater good.
Yeah, the greater good, for sure.
That's where you were getting with, like, there are gradations. There are different ways of leveling that. Not all obligations are the same degree. That, again, we'll use simple examples. I have an obligation to take care of my house pets, but I have an obligation to take care of my children. So if those genuinely conflict, that I have to choose whether or not to feed my dogs or to feed my children, I have a greater obligation to feed my children. And now, like, some people are like, no, you take care of the dumb animals first. No, humans are worth more than animals. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it might seem silly, but it's one of those, again, if we have to choose, if we genuinely have to do this, we need to know what the greater good is.
And today is when we get canceled.
Yeah. Okay. So, because again, I'm not advocating that we harm animals.
No.
But if I have to choose, but that's what people hear. They're like, how could you possibly let the dog suffer? I was like, because if I have to choose between the dog suffering and the human suffering, I'm going to choose the dog. Okay. That's properly ordering our loves. That's knowing what our obligations are. So that's why in the passage with Jesus, he's asking the question concerning, the keeping of the Sabbath versus saving life and showing mercy. That this man shows up with this withered hand, which is just fascinating to me. I've always, when I've read this, is that episode, Jesus heals a man with, again, a withered hand. Whatever was wrong with his hand, it's now strengthened. That's the reason they want to kill him, is because he healed somebody's hand on the Sabbath.
I always have it in my head. It's a man with cerebral palsy, which is where they have that hand where that's like that. So I always have it in my head that it's a man with cerebral palsy who walks in and has been like this his entire life. Mm-hmm. And they watch the hand just strengthen and go right, and they're ready to kill him.
And the Pharisees, what they want is they want Jesus to wait, because that's where you follow the law. You don't work on the Sabbath. Now, for listeners, they may not understand that the Jewish law forbid any kind of work such that you couldn't even kindle a fire. Right. So that's why even modern practices, they won't turn on lights many times. Many Jews, in honoring the law to not kindle a fire, won't turn on the light because it serves the same purpose. So where we look at this and we recognize the same kind of thing, like, okay, we're going to honor the Sabbath. We're not going to work. We're not going to do these things. We're going to follow the law. But what do you do now that here you have a guy who's asking, will you heal me? And the Sabbath, of course, was on Saturday. So, well, no, you're going to have to wait, till midnight? Well, I guess from our reckoning, from sundown for the Sabbath. So, let's just wait 6 hours. Let's just hang out until then. Mm. And so Jesus is, why am I waiting? Why are we doing this? Here's a man who has a need. Why would you, again, as a doctor, why would you wait and administer the bandages until the Sabbath is over? They have a need right now.
Yep. I think to the modern reader, this seems silly. Like to the modern reader, this idea is not a moral dilemma. But if you know, we read everything in context, and so historical and cultural context is important here. In that it was one of the commandments. Like this was not a small deal. Like the idea of doing anything on the Sabbath, it's more than just like, it's a big deal to break the commandment. And in their mind, he was breaking the commandment in front of everyone. I mean, this is like, we may not keep the Sabbath holy today, but we have very similar ideas in which we might not want to do something because we look at it as an evil, which is what they were looking at him breaking this as an evil.
It'd be like breaking the law in front of your pastor, like our context. Like the one that has that moral authority and the one that's, maintaining that moral authority over your life, you're going to, that's the weight of it. It'd be like, what say the pastor is doing something wrong, and you don't like, still that there's that weight of his authority that we have to overcome in order to do right. And I think that's part of it.
But I think it's even goes back to that tradition that all of their lives for generations, this is what they've done.
Yep.
That the very first Sabbath breaker, when Moses gave the law, and immediately like a guy went out and worked on the Sabbath, they took him out of the camp and they put him to death. So
right.
You've had that was not a common practice, but there was that element.
Yep.
It was super important. In the days of Nehemiah, he shut the city down. We will not have the foreigners coming in doing business on the Sabbath. It was so ingrained such that the Pharisees were, many speculate that the Pharisees were created during the intertestamental time to keep the people from breaking the law, because breaking the law is what brought captivity.
Yep.
It's what brought Babylon. It's why the Jews suffered oppression for so long. So
the intertestamental time being the 400 years between
Malachi and Matthew.
Yes,
Yeah.
So in between New and Old Testament.
So that's why in this particular episode there is that sense of dilemma. There is that sense of we have an obligation that needs to be fulfilled. But now you also have the obligation. Here's a man who needs a cure, and Jesus has it. And all he has to do, and again, it's Jesus. What does he really have to do? He doesn't actually do anything. He tells the guy, stretch forth your hand, which actually the stretching forth of the hand wasn't even considered work under the law. And I don't know how the miraculous gift of healing falls under necessarily the keeping of the laws and the way that you're supposed to keep the laws, because that's not listed in the commandments.
I mean, I think it would fall under a lot of the same duties as what the priests would do. I think it would fall under there. So I think their basis would be sound.
Because now he has to be presented. He's healed. Because there were aspects of the law that if you were deformed, you weren't allowed to participate in certain aspects of the ceremonies. Mm-hmm. So now he has to be declared whole and clean. So there's a lot that's going on. But again, people look at this and they say, well, for Jesus, it wasn't a dilemma. It is a dilemma. There are two principles at play, but Jesus, as we say with the language of virtue, quickly and easily made the decision.
Right.
He knew what he needed to do.
Right. So the ultimate question is then, how do we teach our children this? I think kind of as I think about all the different ideas and all the different examples that we have in Scripture, the one common denominator in all of them is that they all wanted to seek God's good. Like they wanted to seek God's will. Mm-hmm. And so I think the number one way that we teach our children is first we show them that we make decisions based upon what would be good for God. What is God's desire in each one of these situations? If we make those decisions silently and we don't ever, have those conversations with our children, and we don't ever point out why we make the decisions that we do, then we can't even begin to approach something when there is an actual dilemma. Mm-hmm. If we haven't built upon that, the idea that in our families, in my life, I always want to do what God would want me to do. I want to seek His good.
Because I think what happens if you have that kind of either or black and white kind of mentality about morality in life, and when a kid goes into the world and its messiness and all the contingencies and the different things that could happen to them, and they're faced with this dilemma. They they have no clue what to do. Like, wait, this doesn't fit in the two categories that I've always thought.
When I think what you're describing is, if we do that,
Yeah.
then we're modeling Pharisees. We're modeling
Yeah.
the Pharisaical. If we say everything is black and white, I think that's what we're doing. Is we're saying, you have to be hard-headed about this. And I mean, man, we're the Pharisees in our own homes then, if that's how we're going to handle it.
So, in bringing this to the key aspects of virtue that we teach, part of the aspects of prudence, one of the virtues, is the idea of judging what we ought to do.
Mm-hmm.
And judgment takes two forms. Now, I won't go into the fancy words, but the best English rendering we have is we have what we call common judgment, where you have a simple, clear rule or law to follow. Like, again, this is what I'm supposed to do, so I do that. Well, what do you do when you lack a clear principle or law? What do you do when you lack, like, well, this isn't in the book? Well, we call that uncommon judgment. And in the case of moral dilemmas, we're facing that uncommon judgment, that we have two principles that conflict. And I've actually used passages like this with Jesus and the man with the withered hand to show uncommon judgment, that we do have, there's clear, we're supposed to keep the Sabbath. There's clear, we should show mercy. But now what do? We have to use that prudence to judge what is the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that God values more? Does he value the resting of the Sabbath, or does he value the showing the mercy, which Jesus brings out? He's like, we should understand God's will for this. We should understand his heart. And that's where he's able to use that in that particular situation. Because there's other situations where it's not always a formula. I think that's what happens with ethics and morality. I know I teach a class on ethics. It's one of my favorite classes because we get to deal with some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
You're laughing. Like you've sat through that. So
one of my favorite classes. I loved it.
It gets worse every time because we want things to be clean. We want there to be a formula.
Yeah.
I don't want to communicate, and I don't want people to get the idea that, there's just no answers. I do want to say, and I think it's important, and parents, maybe this is something to give parents, that sometimes when we have a dilemma, we may not know what the right answer is. That there are situations, and it's fair to say, we don't know what the right thing is. So we're not just going to toss that to a gray area. We're not going to say that there's not an answer. There is. We just may lack the discernment. We may lack the information that we need.
And then the result of that is to seek counsel.
Well,
there's many times not many times, but there are times when we may not know the answer, but it is the right thing to do to seek counsel. And that counsel may still struggle with what is the right answer, because we can have some very serious dilemmas, especially if we want to seek God first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can become hard. One thing I want to make sure that we don't, there's a message I want to make sure we're not sending, and that it is not always the greater good, in the sense that whatever can benefit me more, not like a utilitarianism. And I say that
word. Can you please define that word, Nick?
What is more practical and what benefits me the most?
The greatest good for the greatest number.
There you go. The greatest good for the greatest number. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and he said that when he goes to work, sometimes he has to check his integrity at the door, and that it is never right for him to have to do that to feed his family. And it was something that he was struggling with, and I agreed with him. But if you go with just the greater good, well, feeding my family is more important, so you would just live that way. But he's not doing that. Don't get me wrong. Like, he recognizes the issue at hand, but he knows that the right thing is to find a new way to feed his family, is not to have to do that. So it's not always utilitarian in nature. It is, and it needs to be. We need to seek the greater good for what God would want. What God, we want to seek Him. Because
if you just come to this realization, I can't work here anymore, and because you have to have the process. If you're not happy there, and you're like that person said, I have to leave my integrity at the door, meaning that they're just it's not good for them spiritually or whatever to even be in this environment. You also have to have the prudence to know that, well, I have to keep this job until I find another one, and not just, that process of recognizing and using your reason in these sorts of dilemmas. Like, you can't just jump to,
I don't know, man. I think it's going to matter. I think there's an element of what is the great, like, what's the dilemma at hand, right? Sometimes it's not keep the job, right?
Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, it's a level of prudence. Sometimes it's walking away when you got to walk away.
Yeah, I think there's levels. Like, there's some, if you're going in there and there's just, there is a place where I think God just tells you, like, you're just you need to leave here. The Spirit is just telling you that, this is not good at all. But I'm talking about, in some situation, maybe you're not agreeing with upper management with their, like, the kind of compromises they're making. And you're like, I can't ethically feel like I should keep this job. That's something you can probably, like, all right, now I got to find a job before I leave that place. But if there's, like, there's a level of,
But see, now you're really getting into the dilemma of it, because there's people who would say, well, what if you are the good person there who can bring the change into that company?
That's true too.
That's why we teach virtue, is because virtue is seeking that good, the ultimate good. And we need to properly not just love it, but also understand in these situations how to seek that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these examples that we're talking about, if we're going to ultimately want to teach our family or teach our children this, then I think these ideas and these thoughts and these things that we're going to wrestle with, I think the way that we teach our children is by sharing it with them.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe being a little more transparent in our households than probably many of us are.
And I think it comes down to when we are cultivating these virtues and living it out and facing these dilemmas, and like I said, discerning what we can share and what we shouldn't. When our children face these things, to help them think through it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, we like to just simply apply the rule and go on. And there is some element, and it might be it's going to be another topic for another day, but the element of conscience that comes into this, because even Paul says that if something is not a sin, he says this in Romans, if something's not a sin and you think it is and you do it, then to you it is a sin.
It is a sin, yeah.
Okay. So there is an element of conscience, but it's not, crazy, let your conscience be your guide, just willy-nilly.
Right.
But there is, with several times when students have presented me with various dilemmas that were very real, not just hypotheticals, there was some element I said, I do not know the right answer, but there is that element, seeking, figuring out, and in the end, your conscience needs to be clear that this is the action I'm taking, this is the best way I'm doing it, that if you're violating your own conscience regularly, there should be some sense that conscience is there for a reason, that if we have a sense of the good and we're constantly violating that, we need to check what's going on there. Is it because I've learned something that's true, but because of habits and traditions? Going back to what we read about Jesus, they had a conscience issue. This is what we've always done, and it can take some time to reshape that.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's where, again, we have to identify what is truly good, and that's when we conform not just our choices, but our feelings, that conscious to it.
What I think is important to just kind of reiterate there is when we have these questions, these dilemmas in our lives or in our children's lives, the right answer is not to just tell them what to do. The right answer is what you said was, I remember exactly how you said it, but guide them through it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them the questions, use the Socratic method to ask the questions, and in a method of guiding them through. And really, like the most powerful thought is the self-thought, bringing them to where they can learn to make those decisions on their own towards their idea. And it's not just mom and dad telling them. Now, sometimes it may require the end to just tell them. But I think that was important, is that you said, like ask them the question, like guide them, like teach them
good.
how to do it. And I think that's the most important part of this, is if we're going to teach it, we have to teach them how to think, not just tell them the answers.
Probably going to have a whole nother episode on what the Socratic method is.
I think that's a
how
good
to
idea.
Use that
I
in
really
the
think that's a
family.
good idea.
It really is.
I really do. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for the conversation as usual. You can find us at familiesofvirtue.com. This is Virtuous Roots, where you can find us on all the streaming platforms. We'll talk to you next time.